We've got a big task ahead of all of us. We've got a general election campaign which the SNP traditionally haven't done as well as we've done in the Scottish Parliament elections. But the landscape that we're going into this general election on is so vastly different to anything we've ever done before. Coming off the back of the referendum, we've seen SNP membership skyrocket. We're at something like 96,000 members in the SNP now. That's 96,000 people who can come out and directly support and help the campaigns that Neil has in Edinburgh South and I have in Midlothian. We've never seen the likes of this. But I don't think it stops at the 96,000. There are dozens and hundreds and thousands of people beyond that who said yes in the referendum, who want to see change in this country, who maybe haven't come over to the SNP to join, maybe they don't feel that they're naturally at home in the SNP yet, but they might eventually come. A lot of these people have said yes, will be members of another political party. Some of them will be in Labour, there's even some in the Conservative Party. Those few Lib Dems that are left, there's probably some of them who said yes, and we know that there's many within the Green Party said yes. The argument we need to be making as we go into this general election is we absolutely appreciate and respect that people have different political party views, but ultimately if we want to make the transformation forward that we want to see, to take us in the next step to achieving independence, it's by taking that first step of supporting the SNP in this general election coming. I say that not because the general election itself is a vote on independence, but it's a vote to say, in Scotland, we were made a promise. We were told there would be more powers and more decision making, more responsibility coming to the Scottish Parliament. And immediately, the minute the vote was passed, it was the backtracking started. Gordon Brown came to Lone Head to unveil his pledge. What was it, the closest thing to a federal state you can get where 85% of the population are responsible for the vote? Well, certainly what they're pledging in the Smith Commission doesn't even come close to that. Never mind the clauses that they've now presented off the back of that they took a further step back from even that. I like to think that what Mr Brown was referring to was Home Rule. I know that's certainly my interpretation of the vow was what was being promised to the people of Scotland to vote no, you'll get Home Rule. We're certainly not getting that. Now, we know that a number of the parties have different and varying definitions depending on who you speak to. Labour seems to be the furthest behind on that landscape, despite the fact that they were the sort of, I feel like, one of the original proponents of Home Rule. In 1927, the Independent Labour Party member for Motherwell, James Barr, presented to the House of Commons the Government of Scotland Bill. Sorry, it never actually became an act, if only. The Government of Scotland Bill very clearly outlines Home Rule. Essentially it says all powers will transfer to the Scottish Government, and it called it a government, with the exception of Army, Air Force, Navy and matters of foreign affairs. These wouldn't be reserved, it was noted. These powers would actually be decided by a joint committee which would be sat on by representatives of the Scottish Government and the rest of the UK Government. To me, that is genuine Home Rule. That is where you get the decision making, that is where you get the power. And I think that any time that we're talking about Home Rule, Devo Max, that's the definition I'm certainly applying to it. And that's the standard that I'm holding the Labour Party to from the promises that they made to the people of Scotland. What my focus clearly in Midlothian is on the Labour Party because they are the incumbent party for the seat in Midlothian, but they are also the party where I think the strongest support of non-SNP members for independence lies. We saw that the population of Scotland, and certainly Midlothian, if I look to the 2010 general election, 75% of the population of Midlothian voted for a unionist party in 2010. Yet only 55% of them said no. So there are a large number of people there who have traditionally voted for a unionist party but wanted to see that step forward in taking our country forward. I mean, we've heard from Neil, and it's important that we look at the issues of what has this coalition government and their Labour predecessors done to us. They've put us into this situation where we're all having to battle against the cuts that are being made, against the decisions that have been taken, regardless of the views of our own government or even the people in our communities. And we're having to deal with the fallout from this, the Scottish Government, having to take mitigating action. I don't want a Scottish Government to have to take mitigating action. I want a Scottish Government to be able to say, we're not doing this because we don't agree. And I think any reasonable country would want to see the government that they elect be able to do that. Sadly, where we are just now, we have a government at Westminster who do not listen. I think there's a growing feel in the south that they're not listening either. It's certainly more emphasised in Scotland, and we saw that muchly through the referendum campaign. Nicola, only a couple of weeks ago, went to London to deliver a speech, an exceptional speech, on why there was an alternative to austerity and how it could work. How you can invest in public infrastructure, how you can invest in public services. You create the jobs and you then create that boost for the local economy. Certainly I know in Midlothian this is something we're trying to do in the council to try and help boost, because we know that so many people in the area are work through the council, that if we can do that, take that step within even just the Midlothian Council, the benefits of that will fall out beyond the council into the local communities, into the local economy. If we could do that on a national scale, just think of the new jobs that could created, the unemployment levels coming down, average wages going up. How can anyone in Westminster argue that that would not help to boost our economy? You start to do that, your tax take increases, and you're able to support the other functions that you need to do. Austerity is not the answer. Sadly, it would appear that both the major parties looking to form the next government, Conservative and Labour, are intent on carrying forward the austerity programme regardless. They seem unable to listen or look at the evidence that says it is not working. We simply look at the sanctions that are applied to people through welfare reform, the complete and utter disregard to the impact that has on individuals' lives, their families and everyone around about them when sanctions are applied without thought. It is an absolutely appalling system that needs to be changed. Now, if that power were transferred to the Scottish Parliament, I think there's absolutely a case to say that we could do something differently about that. We've already seen how we've taken action against the bedroom tax. We've seen how the Scottish Parliament can make the changes. And this is the other point I think we'll pick up from Neil. We're going into an election where you do have a tale of two governments. I mean, yes, the Scottish Government have got a very limited scope of powers that we're responsible for, but look at how we've dealt with them, and look at how we've used them to actually benefit the communities around Scotland as compared to the Westminster Government, who have simply seen it as an opportunity to cut public spending. I think public spending can be a very, very good thing. It really does help and support many of our communities, and it can be used to generate that wider support within the economy. But the current Tory Liberal coalition have just failed. The Labour Party look like they just intend to do exactly the same, despite what they might come up to Scotland to tell us, because they somehow seem to think that we've got this zip up the back, that we don't see what they're saying when they're talking to their constituents in the south. They think that it's acceptable to put one message out in Nottingham and a totally different message out in Scotland. It just doesn't work. The age of social media means we see what they're saying, we know when they're being duplicitous in this way, and that we can hold them to account. It's possibly the first time, I think, that Scotland we've had our eyes opened. The referendum let us do this. It let the population look into the issues to become far, far more aware. It's been said by many that in Scotland we're now the most politically literate nation on the planet because of the engagement on whatever side of that debate anyone was in. And I think going into this general election, whether people said yes or not yet, I think it's a case that we can make the argument to say, lend your support to the SNP for the coming general election, because the one thing you can be assured of, you'll be electing an MP who will be going to Westminster not to simply fall in with the establishment, but an MP who will go down there to represent their communities, to represent those who have elected them, and an MP who will fight tooth and nail for their communities, and will look to deliver that positive change that we all want to see coming forward. The campaign's not going to be an easy one. I don't think in any part of the country. We know that there's going to be a huge amount of work to be done. But I know that sort of Neil and I are certainly up for that, and we were both at a candidates' day last weekend, and you could really feel the enthusiasm coming through from all of our candidates. They just really wanted to get on with the campaign, because we know that we have so many people who want to make a difference to their communities. I don't think anyone in the SNP's got involved or been elected simply because it was the progression, it was the career path. We see this far too often in the Labour Party, where they've got those who've simply come through because it's the next step, or it's their turn, or you're next. And I think we are very fortunate in the SNP that that's never been the case. Every one of our elected members has come through and has been active on the ground all the way through to Nicola Sturgeon. Every one of our elected members has started on the ground, we've knocked at doors, we're talking to people. We're likely to be the most accessible MPs our country will ever have seen. Because I know certainly that I've heard that locally a number of criticisms about the inaccessibility of some MPs. I know that SNP MPs would be accessible, would be talking to their communities, and would be there to answer the questions, because ultimately that's what you're electing your MP to do. The MP is not elected to represent themselves in Westminster. The MP is elected to represent the community who put them there. And I think above all else, that is the one thing we can say with absolute certainty that an SNP would be doing first and foremost. We know where the mandate comes for our position if successful in an election. We know that it comes from the people in our communities. It doesn't come from ourselves or the party. That said, clearly the party has a very strong position. We are doing exceptionally good work. And as a strong team of SNP MPs, just think of the strong voice that will have in Westminster to make the case for the positive changes we want to see. There's a very high probability that the next Parliament in Westminster will be another hung Parliament. It's possible that somehow David Cameron manages to get himself re-elected as Prime Minister. I mean, I have to say, that doesn't say much more, it says less for David Cameron than it does for just how appallingly bad the current incumbents in the Labour Party are. It's a sad state of affairs when given the track record of this current government, the Labour Party aren't absolutely walking this election. Because if you look back in history, they would be against just about any other Tory party if they had a better leadership. It's just not there. And the thought of Ed Miliband being Prime Minister, I think, terrifies people. That said, if there's an opportunity following the general election, we know for a fact that the SNP will not, on any circumstances, back another Tory government. I think we can be absolutely crystal clear on that. I think was it the rocks will burn in the sun before that was to come around. But if there was an opportunity for the SNP with a large block of MPs to make some of the advances we want to see, why wouldn't we talk to the Labour Party? Because they claim in some situations to want the same things. There are many within the Labour Party who claim to still be anti-nuclear. Is there an opportunity there for a combination on that issue between the SNP and Labour to say, no, we're not going to replace Trident. There's £100 billion that we can use for something else far more worthy and beneficial to our communities. We don't want to see NHS privatisation. Is there an argument to say that the SNP and Labour could come together to say, we are going to stop this, we're going to put an end to it? These are the sort of issues where I would see, not in any necessarily formal coalition, but on an issue by issue base, we could get the outcomes for Scotland that we've been elected to get by working together and ensuring that we're getting that. That's what that means to have a strong voice of the SNP in Scotland. Now again, Neil made the point about Labour's myth, I think is the fairest way I could put it. Vote SNP, get Tory. It's bizarre. If they'd had a few years since the last general election where we had a Tory government, you could maybe understand why they would try it again. But it was only in 2010 that they tried this. In 2010 they said to us, vote SNP and you'll get Tories. So across large parts of Scotland, people went to the polls and dutifully voted Labour to stop the Tories and got the Tories. It doesn't happen. In fact, when you look at the numbers, the years when the SNP vote has been highest are the years in which we've ended up with a Labour government. So it's actually the complete opposite of what they're trying to tell us. In 1983, 87, 92, 79 and 2010, Scotland voted overwhelmingly Labour and we got the Tories. Enough. No more. I think we need to be absolutely crystal clear. When people go to the polls on the 7th of May this year, if they vote for the SNP, they'll get the SNP. It's as simple as that. It's not a vote for anyone else. If you start looking at the combinations of all what the parties are saying, if you've got Labour saying vote SNP get Tory, you've got the Tory party saying vote SNP get Labour, maybe they should try talking to each other at some point. Others saying you vote Tory, you get UKIP, you get Tory. You could have yourself tied up in knots if you started following that logic. It's a simple argument. You go to the polls and you vote for the party that you think will best represent what you want to see coming forward. And a vote for the SNP will mean a vote for the SNP. It does not, under any circumstances, allow another party, the Tory party, to come in by the back door. In fact, it's a genuine block. So I know we're all up for it. I know we're all keen and genuinely enthusiastic. I think we've got a fair wind at our back, but a lot of hard work to be put in. It is no easy task, but we have a slate of candidates in the SNP who are all just desperate to get down to Westminster to make the changes that we want to see to deliver a better country for our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Phil?
Ian, can you pause that for a second?
Yes.
The Tories and Labour into getting off their backsides and doing
He's doing them regularly enough that
you think it's genuine?
it could be genuine. I mean, he's done it for a while now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always an element of,
Yeah.
I always have an element of scepticism at any poll.
Yeah.
I think the polls are clearly showing us flying high.
Yeah.
The reality is, I mean, to achieve anything like that, you would need an exceptional result. And the polls tend to look at things as a generality across the board, and we know that in a first past the post election,
Yeah.
there are so many individual circumstances and it's very difficult to get past. If we hit the levels of support that are being touted, yes, we will see huge numbers, but to get from the number, the 6 we currently have, there's a big step up before you're starting to get to the 9, 10s and 11s. A huge step to take that up towards 20. You get to a tipping point where you then start to see seats falling like dominoes if the level of support is consistent across them all. But it's a big, big number, a really big number. So
Yeah.
we can't take anything for granted from the polls.
The other weapon that the current government have is it's in their gift to make announcements like the Type 25 frigates.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nicely timed for them, and I'm pretty sure it's all part of strategy.
Oh yeah.
The big announcement on dementia care, I think. There's going to be a whole sequence of these things hitting us, and they will register.
There's 4 more weeks. The 30th of March is the cut-off for PARDA, where no governments can't make any more announcements like that. So 30th of March, I think we can expect to see a number of announcements coming just in the run-up to that. Although, yeah.
Mind you, I was wondering whether the SNP have carefully manipulated this £450 million so-called underspend, which, whether it is or not, whether that's just a war chest for.
Just on it, it's not. I mean, that was one of Labour's greatest. Well, yet another attempted myth.
Yeah.
They claim it was £444 million underspend, but in fact, it's accounting procedures.
Yeah.
The actual money that could be spent of an underspend is 145 million, which is about 0.5% of the Scottish budget. It's half a day's spending. And John, I mean, because it's a fixed budget, John Swinney has to essentially operate to make sure he doesn't go a penny over what he has. So you would always try to make sure you were coming in just that wee bit short. So to get that close to it was exceptional. And in fact, it's not money that's lost. It's rolled forward into next year and it's going to be used to further mitigate welfare reform. So it's been used in a very positive manner. But it was just crazy that the Labour Party tried to play it up as a bad thing that the Scottish Government had sort of underspent, when in fact so much of it was accounting entries.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when Neil and I were at the Candidates Day last Sunday, John Swinney pointed out that when the Scottish Government came in to power in 2007, there was a 1.6 billion pounds underspend that they found that was almost going to be lost. Labour Party hadn't spent it and it was about to be clawed back by Westminster. So for that party to sit and talk about a £145 million underspend, it's quite ridiculous.
The other thing on that is that the permit period doesn't apply to here. So if things are planned correctly, it's just Westminster that stops and dissolves. Holyrood carries on. So there's still the opportunity for the Scottish Government to be releasing policy.
Even right up to the election?
I think they're covered
They
with
both
it.
at that here, are they? Okay. Cancel that.
The Scottish Parliament will continue to sit, but the government announcements have to stop. Government and I know that in the council we're governed by it as well. We're not at the 30th of March is the cut-off point for sort of policy announcements.
Question for some of the two I'd like to know your thoughts on as potential MPs or MPs, your important stakeholders in the local development plan for the Lothians. As you both know, there's huge pressure on the Lothians. It's such a good quality of life, I guess, and we've got tens of thousands of extra houses to get built here. There's currently an impasse in Edinburgh City Council because of this on the local development plan and competing visions that's going to get decided after the general election. I'd like to know what you two, what your thoughts are on planning development in the Lothians, where we can plan, how we can best deliver these homes, if we can push back. Is there a question of density? Can we build elsewhere? What are the implications on, say, transport, air quality? Can we plan better? How can we do this the best way we can for the Lothians?
I'm a member of the South East Scotland Planning Committee, CESPLAN, and I mean there is a very, very strategic approach taken to how planning is developed. Each council ultimately has responsibility to look at where is best, and there's a consultation process that's gone through with that. But also we have to recognise there is significant pressure in the south east of Scotland that is, I mean, the capital city, the job opportunities, it's a massive magnet to pull people in to this part of Scotland. It's a driving force in a lot of ways for many parts of the Scottish economy. So it's, in a sense, it's natural that you have the demand there. I think Midlothian alone has a shortfall of something in the region of 9,000 houses for the demand that's there, and that's not simply council housing or temporary housing. That's all types, all venues of housing. So there's about a 9,000 shortfall just in Midlothian, which is a fraction of the size of the city of Edinburgh. So yes, there's significant development, and in a sense it backs up the position about the need for that infrastructure investment that we're not seeing coming forward from the Westminster Government. You need the infrastructure investment to go with it as well. I think there's an element of catch-up on a number of developments that were approved historically that hadn't yet been built out because obviously with the downturn in the markets. So you've got that catch-up combined with that ongoing demand and the need for future planning. It's when you combine them all, there is a very strategic approach to it. It's all very widely consulted on to make sure that we're taking account of the views of communities across all of the Lothians and the south end of Fife and borders as well. But there's always going to be debate about where, and that a local circumstance or so much of that the where is usually the most, I don't want to say confrontational, but the most debated, the most debated part of any development plan.
Obviously, Owen's considerably more privy to such things as you would be, also than myself. I know from local issues that we have here when I've been on the doors asking people through council by-elections and through this time round as well, nearly everything that comes up as an issue locally is to do with planning. There's hardly anything else comes up with regard. The only thing I'd add there is that I think there must be a greater route as a steering group format across local government, Scottish government, and where it applies, although it's less so in many matters, devolved across the local MP and the Westminster government side of it as well. But with regard to specifics on instances and policy and stuff, I'm not privy on.
If I just come back on that, it's only been a week since the SND have taken a position of sort of hostility towards overdevelopment in the Camel area and the West Edinburgh area, and rather preferring the two houses on the Garden District and the Gyle, or around the Gyle, sorry, is it kind of Rattle Station, south of Rattle Station, that area, that David Murray's proposal for the Garden District. Actually, I would agree that's a very sensible proposal, and it helps protect the green belt in the west of Edinburgh and builds up a village of sorts on the other side of the bypass, and it's an optically attractive part of Edinburgh, so I think that's a sensible proposal. What maybe come back on, Neil, is would you support a tram expansion to facilitate better planned developments even into Midlothian and perhaps Dalkeith, and also into west down to, again, Rattle Station, that sort of way?
I think tram expansion is an option if it's funded differently. You know, if we have some private funding coming into it as well, and it can be stacked up as a more economically viable venture than the tram system that we have, and the cost that went with it to get to this stage. So I wouldn't necessarily poo-poo any expansion of the trams, but it would have to be with a better financing package, and it would have to be commercially viable.
Yeah, certainly would. I would always welcome enhanced public transport links. I think the experience of the trams has put a lot of people off that as an option, but that particular scheme appeared to be drawn up very quickly immediately before a parliamentary election to make a promise. And I think if you are looking at something like that, it needs to be delivered in a very strategic manner. It needs a lot of thought before you get to the we're going to do this point. There's absolutely an argument for guided busways, for light rail, possibly tram. I mean, there's a number of different options that you can look at to help improve public transport links, because there is a definite need.
Surely it would be sensible to look at the model railway route in building houses. We've got, which could be a quite element, an awful lot of money spent on that. Surely we should be looking at that area as a development.
There is huge development down the Borders Rail corridor.
Edinburgh's so lucky, so is Glasgow. Everything, everywhere here in Scotland's accessible. Could be Perth area, Fife, Borders, wherever. Should solve this problem if we work together.
Yeah.
I have 3 questions. I hope very short, if that's allowed, and more relating to the general election. When they start to talk about, vote SNP, get Tories, shouldn't we be saying, well, how did you vote in that referendum for proportional representation? Because if people had voted for that, then we wouldn't be having such big problems with this, would we? I mean, is that an argument we can make? Or, I mean, I understand people really didn't understand PR, especially south of the border.
When you say that again, when you...
Well, it's there's this huge discussion, vote this, get that, blah, blah. But, if we had proportional representation, you get what you vote for.
Yeah,
I think part of the issue there was that the offer that was made it was on alternative vote system rather than actual proportional representation. It was a kind of halfway house. Now the alternative vote is an improvement on first past the post, but it's by no stretch of the imagination proportional, really. I think
maybe we should be saying.
I think
counter-argument.
there's big benefits in proportional representation. I think it's certainly something that would be very possible to do, and you might actually now find. We'll see what the outcome of the general election is. But if you suddenly saw huge numbers of SNP MPs being elected to Westminster, I would be amazed if you didn't suddenly see certainly the Scottish Labour Party and the Scottish Tory Party suddenly becoming converts to the arguments for proportional representation to a Westminster election. Because it's, at the moment, you have a situation where if a party has a very large majority in a seat, there's no way they would want to give up the system that manages to secure that. I mean, we've seen, I think I heard on the radio today that sort of, largely speaking, Conservative, Liberal and SNP at the last general election had around about there wasn't a vast difference in the total votes that each party got at the last general election, 400 and something thousand. Yet you had the Lib Dems getting the number of seats, we get 6 and the Tories get 1. First past the post as a system, it's just simply not fair.
It's certainly in Scotland it would considerably benefit on those figures the Tories. So, but obviously that we're a small element of their calculations strategically on what seats they would win. It's not been mentioned so far as one of the negotiation issues, but I don't think it would be too far down the list of points to negotiate on that we might be asking the question about the vote.
I think we could try hitting back with that. This would.
I think the simple answer for most people would be how they voted, and the alternative vote would be that they didn't vote and probably don't remember it and really don't know much about it.
It was bad it came at the same time as the general election.
Yeah.
My second question was, I've been reading lately about kind of a new campaigning strategy that John McTernan is using, and actually comes from Russia. Have you read about it? Which is based on confusing people, basically. And Murphy seems to be doing this. He says one day that he's against fracking, and the next day that he's for it. And these people who have full-time jobs and normal lives don't have time to keep track of all these swings, and they just get very confused. And how will that affect their voting? And what can we do to counteract that?
If it's a deliberate strategy, they're pretty good at it. I'd sort of spoken on another night about this sort of smash and grab headline tactic, where they get they'll pitch a subject that they think we're going to come out with something on fairly soon. They will go steamrolling right through it and grab a headline on it, and then it's as quick as they can try and let it die. Now I don't know if that's part of that specific strategy or not, but we've seen it happen again, and I no doubt we will see it again. I think maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago even, it might have been a pretty good effective strategy. I think we've got so many people who are slightly more engaged, albeit there's an apathy returning a little bit, but we've got more people who are engaged, and I really don't think it's going to fool people as it might have done certainly last general election and periods up to before the referendum. I think people now are slightly more switched on and more engaged, and also the rapidness of reply through social media, etc., gives us quite a strong route to rebut some of the nonsense that goes on.
Yeah, I think I'd absolutely agree. I think if it is actually a genuine strategy,
it's hard to tell them if it's incompetence.
I think that you could, without being too unkind, suggest that that's possibly a spin doctor spinning to try and make it look like it's deliberate, when in fact the reality is it's just chaotic. I mean, even just this weekend we've seen that total abandonment of I think they would talk about the sort of Labour yes, reclaiming yes, but the launch of that was meant to be yesterday and it's gone, dropped. Oh no, it's almost like, you might have thought you heard us say that, but it's not actually what we said, if you wanted to put it to Malcolm Tucker. So it is like an episode of the thick of it a lot of the time, in these early days of Jim Murphy's leadership at Scottish Labour, because there's U-turn, there's policy abandonments, there's grabbing this, and it's grabbing stuff that they think will create a headline. I mean, we're even seeing it locally where just last week in the Midlothian Council, one of the Labour councillors decided to try and put a motion through the council on the basis of other people's work, and then was shocked and appalled when the people who'd actually been doing the work said, hang on a minute, we've been working in that for the last 2-3 years to work it through in the way that it should be done, and you're putting a motion in to try and take credit for this. It was absolutely unbelievable. Now the fact that that person's shortlisted as a Labour candidate in Midlothian might not surprise some, but it was so blatant in trying to grab headlines from other people's work. Jim Murphy does appear to be trying to do the same. Maybe that's the strategy.
Well, they know that the general voter isn't keeping up with things, so they try and get away with it. My third question, very shortly is mainly for Neil. You're running against Ian Murray, and when you had me look at that flyer, I spent a couple of hours researching him online. And you know, he's not such a bad guy. I really wanted to find something to nail him on. But my impression is he is actually trying to do a fairly good job, but he has to toe the party line. So what are your strategies? He's got an amazing PR mechanism. I get, you know, newsletters from him almost every week. How are you going to fight against that?
I wouldn't be trying to out Ian Murray what he does. He does have a good communication network. He some of what he communicates is probably questionable. Some of the statistics that he claims and things like that, people are going to raise an eyebrow at. But that's for them to do. We'll be working as well on, he is a shadow from bench, and that does mean he votes in a manner down in Westminster that isn't particularly representative of here, whether that's, you know, welfare cuts, whether that's Trident or whatever. But I don't think here it's going to directly be run as a campaign on the two personalities of Neil Hay versus Ian Murray. That would be disproportionate anyway, because he's had 5 years of communication, plus more with the council, of contacting people here. So we wouldn't be going, I'm not going to be sitting there saying, how is Neil Hay going to beat Ian Murray? This is a campaign where how is the SNP going to win this seat? Now I'm the chosen person in the vehicle to do that, so I will put myself up there and represent myself and the party, etc., but not in a direct competition with Ian Murray.
So what can we do to get your name out there in the 2 months remaining, so that when people go to the polls recognize it?
There's a whole number of things media-wise that we'll do, and we're starting to do them just now. I'll speak to you about it afterwards if you want.
And maybe slightly general term, I mean, I think we have to recognize there are probably a number of people, this might be controversial, but there's a number of people in the Labour Party who are actually really good people, and they are trying to do it for the right reasons. The problem I have is not the individuals, largely. It's that you've got a party in Scotland which still looks back to the traditional roots of the Labour Party, yet they have a leadership from Westminster which has utterly abandoned those principles. It has taken them so far to the right that by any measure of a political compass, if you put in the policy agenda of the UK Labour Party, they are now a right of centre party. And I mean, they cannot hide from that. So you've on one hand got your traditional Labour Party members, your traditional Labour Party supporters in Scotland, who still see the Labour Party as what was founded. Yet what they're now voting for, in many cases not necessarily always realising it, is a party that is further to the right in many ways than Maggie Thatcher ever was. And if they actually sat and looked at that and realised it, would be appalled that they had been allowed themselves to be hoodwinked to believing that the party was still what it originally started out to be. I think many started to see that through the referendum when the arguments were being made, and it was starting to get through. But I mean, it's a big job to highlight that. But I think there's a lot of good people in the Labour Party who I think, if you were to sit and have that conversation with them, you would find that we agree on so many things. And if they could if the Labour Party ever came back the way that they had been towards their roots, you might find that we actually got on far better than we currently do, because at the moment all they've got, their number one campaigning tool is SNP is bad. It's not we are standing for this, we want to do that, we want to promote this. It's isn't it terrible the SNP did that? I can't believe the SNP did that. Did you see what the SNP did there? It's the first port of call every time. And I think more and more that can only go on for so long. As we continue to talk the positive messages about the way we want to see Scotland develop, when the only arguments against it are, we disagree with you, SNP are bad, I think people have had enough of that. And I think I would certainly hope that through this general election, it simply won't stick.
Maybe one way that Dale can tackle Mr. Murray is he's a supporter of the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, TDIP, which is a huge threat to NHS. That really is where the nationalisation south of the border is coming. Now, the authenticity of this, I'm really not aware. I picked it up in a Facebook post last week. TDIP is supported by the British American business, a director of which is Greg Briggs, a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, PricewaterhouseCoopers pays Mr. Murray's office rent £45,000. So that is worth checking out, because there's clearly a vested interest there.
So you can say that again? PricewaterhouseCoopers pays?
Yeah, they sponsor, and probably before Murray was there, maybe in Griffith's time as well.
Yeah, really?
That was, I think it had come from Private Eye one time. Private Eye quote is hash 1364, if somebody wanted to check it.
I can look
I
at
think
it.
certainly the TTIP is a massive threat. Albeit, I mean, and I know the argument comes against that health services are devolved to Scotland, there's no threat, all this sort of stuff. And I did a debate with Neil Finlay in the referendum campaign where they say, oh, but no, there's no threat in Scotland, all this sort of stuff. But there is, because if the TTIP proposals go through and we see that further privatisation of the NHS in England, it won't directly privatise the NHS in Scotland, but what it will do is you can be guaranteed that the reason they're doing it is to cut spending. And if they cut health spending in England, there's a direct consequence through the Barnett formula that cuts funding in Scotland. That is a major threat to our health service.
Correct.
But TTIP is not just the NHS.
No.
It's just a horrible thing from start.
It's certainly the core focus at the moment is certainly on the NHS, but no, you're right, it is well beyond that.
Jim was going to say something.
Yeah, I quite like what Ian just said, and I was going to make a few comments in a similar vein about Murray's sort of links to the sort of business establishment in Westminster that is maybe a weak link. I mean, if you look at Labour's historical reluctance to do anything about, you've got LIBOR riggers, you've got people that are rigging LIBOR rates. I mean, you've got the RBS is now asset stripping its own customers under the noses of the government that owns it, and Labour saying almost nothing. You've got tax dodgers getting away with murder, often supported by companies like PwC who are set up parts of the business to advise these people. It's a completely immoral Westminster establishment structure that you're fighting, Neil. And I would say that I'm sure you will, from what you said earlier about taking on these vested interests, sort of say, well, I would simply put these guys in jail. Ian Murray, what would you do? Why are you not calling for these tax dodgers get put in jail? Normally, if you steal something from someone, I imagine, and even if the police recover the goods, you still expect to get prosecuted, and it should be the same for tax.
You just say
Should be one rule for millionaires and those well connected with offices supplied by PwC and whatnot, and then another rule for Joe Public who gets the food bank and the bedroom tax and all that sort of thing. And really, there's a real anti-establishment line that you can use on Labour, because they are the party of the establishment just as much as the pals of Tories in Westminster. So I think that's worth pursuing. Challenge vested interest, champion the disadvantaged, even things like the way that the parliamentary expenses were viewed, as you know, and exploited. That's something that you say that you would take a very hard line on that. It's a harder line than was taken before. That it's completely unacceptable and intolerable. You're there to champion the interests of the disadvantaged and the unfortunate in the face of the establishment. That would be your priority.
Well, Ian Murray has just had a big job fair where he's reached out to thousands of people who are really hard up. So, and they don't understand, they've never heard of PricewaterhouseCoopers. So
that's another thing.
He's slippery.
Some of these big firms have an intern culture where you're expected to pay several £1,000s just to get your foot in the ladder of a big firm. And it's completely unfair for those who are coming from a disadvantaged background. You're basically ignoring the minimum wage. These terrible intern policies shouldn't even be allowed. It's exploitation, it's slavery.
Also in the tax situation, they came out and said tax avoidance is legal, tax evasion is legal. If that was the case, how did HMRC recover £135 million from people who were part of the HSBC scheme? So some of it must have been very, very dodgy indeed. And on the expenses thing, that same article I read, Mr. Murray's expenses to November 2013 were £189,000, which people in Gilmerton wouldn't appreciate very much, I would think.
Even though his rent is being paid for.
I think when you look at some of these tax schemes, I think part of the issue there and why they've been able to reclaim some of it will have been that loopholes have been identified and closed. HMRC are all, well, in fairness to them, and it might not always be, but in fairness to HMRC, they're forever playing catch up because you do have a culture of organisations looking to find the loopholes in the legislation that exists, and that's your avoidance, which is in theory legitimate, as opposed to evasion, which is illegal. So there would be that element of catch up where a loophole will be closed and then somebody will be liable on the basis of that going forward. But I think there's a far better argument to say that the whole system should be cleaned up, made far simpler, and that way you don't then have the ability for the loopholes, because if it's a simple system, I mean, the current tax system we have in this country is hugely complex, and that allows loopholes to be developed. If you simplify the whole thing and make it far more straightforward, you don't create an environment where these loopholes can exist. And I hear today Danny Alexander's latest plan is to tackle the companies that are creating the loopholes or identifying the loopholes. And I mean, I have to say there's probably some merit in looking at that. He's talking about legislation prior to the general election, so it's amazing how suddenly, when the Lib Dems' fortunes are not looking so great, he's come up with this great plan when there's been a lot of stuff in the press about tax avoidance.
Taking them 4 years and 9 months to get there.
Yeah, so it's timing's interesting, but I think there is merit absolutely in some of what he's saying. I think he's certainly jumping on a bandwagon, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Can I come back in again?
Yep.
Yeah.
A final point on this, on a very similar topic. You've probably heard dealing with these guys called non-doms. You've probably got there's some of our press barons, one got a bit of a parent from a foreign country, so they can live in the UK, but they don't pay tax here on their foreign their interests abroad, so their earnings abroad, and they don't pay inheritance tax. You challenge Ian Murray to say, well, you close that loophole in the non-dom tax breaks for Russian oligarchs and others that can basically earn millions abroad and doesn't get taxed in the UK. You don't get that states in America. If you're American and you pay tax in the US, no matter where it's earned, as part of being a citizen, shouldn't you have those same standards here? And you could challenge him to say he'll close that loophole. I'm sure he won't.
Yeah. You'll see about that.
You'll see.
No, they will. They will. It's not their policy to say they will. I think they can't. They've looked at it. There's too many of their own donors are involved. Yeah. They won't want to go near it.
At the candidate meeting last week, did you get some assurances there's going to be some real peppy support from head office? Because we're terribly quiet at the moment. I mean, all the headlines are Murphy's grabbing them.
Yep.
I think
We need lines like SNP policies are for long term, not just for general elections. You know, talking about Christmas.
We have I suppose it's a repeating thing, isn't it, when we come into big elections? Yes was a simple answer to that. Yes, they're there. Yes, they're working on it. We were not given any timeline on it. We were given timelines on when materials were scheduled to be issued, but not the subject of those. And the subject around them when they're coming for launch. The first one's due, and its subject matter will be the NHS, but that's as much as we know. And sort of graphics of that leaflet are available publicly anyway, but beyond that, no. As far as the strategy goes, yes, there will be a message, but not what the messages were. I was asking what those messages, the theme would be, because we don't want, if we can tie something of a local issue with whatever that national issue, then all the stronger the case for us. However, that information isn't yet available, and we weren't told how far in advance of those publications we will know what the subject matter are.
I mean, Jim Murphy's absolutely he seems to have a seat at the BBC just now. It's no matter what programme it is, no matter what show it is, they seem to have him on standby ready to come in with his policy for the day, and then to come back the next day and reverse it. I think that's where we are on that setup just now. He's just taken over as leader of the Scottish Labour Party. They've got some mileage in it, and he's saying a lot without necessarily doing a lot. Obviously we have a Scottish Government who are delivering, continuing to work hard. We saw £100 million announced for delayed discharge, help to reduce delayed discharge only a few weeks ago. Shona Robinson came out to Pennycook and was able to sort of say what work's happening. Scottish Government working with local councils to help put in place new measures that can help to reduce delayed discharge. In Midlothian, for example, we've had no delayed discharge in the last 2 measures of that in December and January. So the Scottish Government are continuing to work and are delivering, whereas Jim Murphy's creating a lot of headlines without actually really doing anything. I think it's sometimes tricky when we get into this period just before the election, especially when we're in the government, because there's going to be the difficult things that are happening as well. But the reality is it's the SNP government in Scotland that are working hard and delivering for people in Scotland. We've got a massive benefit as candidates, the fact that that is the case, because we can look to that record and say, look, this is what the SNP does and can do when you elect us. We've been able to do this with seriously limited resources. Just imagine what you can do if you elect a team of SNP MPs who can go down and make the case for greater powers to come to the Scottish Parliament so that we can do more of this good stuff to help improve the quality of life for people in Scotland.
The other thing we sometimes do is we get hung up, because of the volume of media is disproportionate between ourselves and Labour, we get hung up on seeing Murphy and whoever else on the telly all the time. But when we look at the ratings and the personal ratings of Murphy and our equivalent leader Nicola Sturgeon, Nicola's get stronger and they go up all the time. Murphy sits still or goes down generally. So from that, people's trust in them, you have to say people are sort of seeing through it a wee bit. It's not as damning in that they're getting all this publicity and people are buying it as was once the case. It's the ratings don't really bear that through, and that doesn't stand up at the moment. That's what there's an awful lot of the weekend's headlines seems to have been the last 2 or 3 weeks that no matter what they do, no matter what they try, they are not making significant inroads in the polls, and his personally are diverging from where Nicola's ratings are going to.
It's funny, my wife's parents in Hoyk still can't acknowledge any benefit the SNP Parliament has given them over the last 6 or whatever years. I was convinced that when Nicola took over, they would become an SNP, because Alec, although I greatly admire him, he is a bit of a Marmite character. You either love him or hate him. They hated him, and for that reason alone they would never vote yes. But they're still stuck in this thing. And you know, from farm labouring backgrounds, we actually suspect they're going to vote Tory this time. It's just incredible. They've got this inbuilt thing here. Yet, when you look at all the benefits they've had as pensioners in Scotland compared to in the south, it's just incredible. But they've just got it in their heads. They won't change.
Yeah, but it's just quite a common thing in the borders as well.
Oh, yeah.
But the older, younger people are far more SNP.
Yeah,
but in Kelso, where we've got connections, prior to the referendum, they would say, we'll have to go to Berwick to buy our petrol because we're so much cheaper than in Scotland.
I know.
There's always myths, and it sometimes takes a while to break through them. It's not always an easy process to have that recognised, because we know that this SNP Scottish Government have delivered so much on a seriously limited base of what we can do. It's a case that we simply need to make the point over and over and over and over again.
We need a very clear list of things we've done.
I mean, the headlines are there. I mean, we've
Because
seen.
people say to us, I can't figure out what they've actually done.
We've seen. Just recently we've got the introduction of 600 hours nursery provision for looked after 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds in Scotland. The council tax freeze is still benefiting people. I mean, I did a calculation in Midlothian, if we hadn't had the council tax freeze and the government money that went with that to meet the budget gaps that I have had, last year, I would have had to put the council tax up by 23%. I mean, it's often, I mean, we hear it from the Labour Party sometimes, depending on who you're talking to and who they're talking to themselves. They sometimes are for it, sometimes are against it, sometimes it was their idea, sometimes it's terrible. But the Labour Party say you should be able to put up the council tax because this is a diminution of local government's authority. But the reality is, when you actually work out what it would have to go up by, I mean, I think when they try to suggest it would be, oh, it would be 2 or 3%. The reality is that wouldn't come close. 23% last year from Midlothian, and in the term that Labour were in, from the institution of the Scottish Parliament through to 2007, the council tax had gone up by 60%. So that would be another 23% on top of that, and that would still leave more to do. So that's the reality of not, if we didn't have the council tax fees, that's the sort of amounts that we'd be talking about.
With regard the sort of points to hang our hats on, there's two bits southwise that we'll probably do with that. One is whenever we're on canvassing packs, we have on the reverse of the guidelines, we put that on. I have a cloud file that has single page A4 briefings dropped into it for anybody to access if they have to go back to somebody's door or just for them to read in advance, so it'll be in there as well. We also have a gentleman in our members called John Miller, who swears by and absolutely loves the e-cards that were produced in 2011 first. And he produced them and paid for them multilingual.
Like flashcards? Or
No, they're like,
cheat sheets?
what's twice the size of a business card? A6? 7, A7. They're A7 size, and they're just double-sided, laminated, and that's exactly what they have on them. Achievements of the Scottish Government, and on the flip side will be the core items that we hang our hat on coming into this. So one is what we have done, and one is what we say we're going to do on the other side. And they get produced and circulated all over the place, and he's wanting to do them again. So if they're done right, they're quite a good wee tool.
That would be. I've had horrible arguments with the Greens, who are very sort of Edinburgh-centric, about the council tax freeze. They claim that that's just giving money to the rich because such huge swathes of Edinburgh are non-resident landlords who are renting.
Well, I mean, again, I've only looked at the detail from a Midlothian point of view, but if you look at the council tax bands, I mean, there's 35,500 households in Midlothian. There's 167 band Fs. The vast majority, I think it's over 60%, are band D and below. So while, I mean, yeah, the wealthy people who live in big houses are getting a discount, and it's no increase as well. If you actually look at it as a proportion of income, it's probably a far smaller proportion of their income than the benefit you're getting at the band A, B and Cs, who will tend to be, but not exclusively, tend to be lower incomes. So the argument, it's not a progressive tax. So if you freeze it, it is going to be, some people at the top end of the scale will save a single amount that is larger than the bottom end of the scale where it will be a smaller amount, but proportionate to their incomes, I would argue that you're actually getting a far bigger benefit at the bottom end, certainly a far greater number of households at the bottom end of the council tax band scale. The only way you can genuinely fix it and to get forward, makes any kind of progress, is you get rid of the council tax and you replace it with something that's far more progressive. The Scottish Government have established the council local tax commission, which is going to be co-chaired with the Scottish Government and COSLA, to look at what do we want to do. But this is a massive move, because for a number of years COSLA have simply said we need to simply revalue the current council tax system, this sort of stuff. To actually get to a position where we're looking at an alternative to the council tax, it's a massive step forward. I'm still a fan of local income tax. I still think that's the best way for us to go, because it is the fairest way. Because it is absolutely based on your ability to pay.
That's an interesting argument. One could say the freeze is there until we can have this other thing. And that makes the freeze make more sense, even to its detractors.
I mean, so that was what was in the manifesto. John Swinney was very clear on this one, that the council tax freeze is there, and that within this term of the Parliament an alternative would be produced, which would go into the manifesto for the next Scottish Parliament elections, to say this is the proposal for an alternative to the council tax. So the process has started, so I can't wait to see what comes out the other side of that, because if you genuinely want a fairer system, it has to be based on income and ability to pay, not the property.
What do you think about the idea of land value tax?
There's a lot of merit in land value tax. Having just said that, I think it has to be based on income. No, I do. I think certainly there is a lot of merit in it. It's a vast improvement on the council tax, and it certainly deals with some of the issues about absentee land owners and that sort of thing. So there's certainly merit in that. I think I'd still prefer it to be based on ability to pay, but I think possibly what you do need to look at is, certainly the local government perspective is saying more control over local taxation should be decided at a local council level, and the ambition from COS was 50%, whereas currently it's about 15%. So perhaps the outcome ends up as being that there's different measures and different mechanisms to take account of the different ownership types, so that it's an individual that will be based on income, but where you've got that sort of situation of land ownership, there might be another opportunity to have a look at that. And I mean, there's absolutely merit in the land value tax. It's not my preferred, personally, not my preferred mechanism, but I think there's a lot of merit in it.
I think one of the good things about it is that you can't hide the land. It's not like with income tax, for example, you've got all these tax dodges and things.
Well, once we've closed the loopholes, we'll find it.
But the land is there. If you know who owns it, you can do something about that.
Yeah.
We need a system that's going to attract business as well. You know, I have to say, I do something to spare at the extreme left end of the movement. It's almost anti-business, but we need to start making things again. To me, that's if you look at the really strong economies across the world, the economies that make things, and we used to have a great history in that. Okay, a lot of it was heavy industry, but we need to bring back heavy industry and light industry, technology, science. We need to make things here, and I don't know how we encourage that, because it's a difficult balance. Being so socialist as well as
I think
not pro-business, but pro-money.
Part of the battle there is only having control over some of the levers.
Absolutely.
Now, when you've got such a pool in London of the draining the resources that is to pull in the funding it requires, it's difficult. I mean, one of the conditions of the Calvin Commission, and it certainly runs through in themes through the Smith Commission, is no detriment. That they can't give us the job creating powers we want, because that might in some way give us an advantage. Imagine that. Imagine the Scottish Government having the ability to give the Scottish economy an advantage. What a terrible proposal that would be. You really do have to despair at times at the short-sightedness of some of those who would argue against this. Of course we want to give advantages to people who want to set up in Scotland. I mean, forever, and I don't know how many times I've heard it, is that, it's terrible the SNP want to cut corporation tax, it's shocking, it's a race to the bottom, all this. That was one of a range of taxation measures to encourage business development, and you think there is a balance to be struck. We absolutely have to find the path. Because you're supporting business doesn't mean in some way that you're suddenly a corporate monster or an anti-socialist. You can do both, and I think the social democratic nature of the party, we've managed to navigate that, I think, very well, and John Swinney in particular has exceptionally well navigated that field to actually put us in the position of we can support a strong economy while still looking after those in our economy who really need it.
It's a must really. Yeah.
Just before we close on this, just on an unusually positive note for me tonight, I just want to run some figures by from when we've been out canvassing, etc. I don't know how today's figures went, but our canvassing to date, which has included some of our leafy areas, some of our not so leafy areas, some of our middle of the road areas, we are polling at 81% SNP. When we take out the won't votes and the refused, we're at 81. When we give all of those undetermined votes, whether it's won't vote or refused or undecided, and we put them and we include them within the Labour vote, being extraordinarily generous, we're still at around the 55 to 37%. So for where we have these worries and we have these concerns, it is still polling extraordinarily positively out there on the doors.
I've seen some figures from the West as well, which kind of echo that, but it's almost a worry that it's so...
Well, this is it. I mean, it's not something I put out there and I've shouted about far and wide, because we have an apathy at the moment, which is slow to start this campaign, but I think it's slow to start everywhere. But we're not really worried about everybody else. It's the concerns that slow to start for us. But that's the figure. I did the figures yesterday, and at 81%, I mean, it's a significant amount of them were not SNP voters, even for Holyrood. You know, they are, when you're showing those figures, the question we ask is, you're basically, for paraphrasing, you're traditionally where you voted and where you're going to vote in May. And the movement there is, you know, tactical voter or Labour to SNP. So the polls are stacking up on the doors so far, but it's not something that we take lightly, and not something we can afford to sit and presume, because there's only one media scare, one major scare or whatever can impact on them quite considerably. But that's where we're at the moment.
You mentioned in reply to Jim that planning comes up a lot in the doorsteps. What's the other issues? Is it austerity, crime, is it National Health Service, or what's...
Well, everything. A little bit of it all.
You see, trying our First Minister did, I thought, brilliantly on Thursday night question time. But she missed.
Yeah.
Repeatedly, the opportunity of saying it's not an independent nuclear deterrent. The word independent was only used by Heseltine numbers. Never did that was the damn thing's not going to anything.
Does the EU cover much?
No.
I looked up Heseltine and his net wealth. It's 245 million plus.
Jesus.
You know, so how can a man like that
Pretty sick.
understand the ordinary man in the street?
Even though I'm deck.
No, that's right. I mean,
You know I had that on deck, so what can you
it's
say?
just incredible. I thought she was going to get I thought she was set for an ambush.
So she
I
was.
mean, the audience wasn't very pro.
Then we'll be ambushed at the end of that
Yeah,
question
yeah.
when you throw in you
Yeah.
Tory support.
But I had full confidence in her. I think she's very, very good, and she's not going to be much at all. But you know,
People
when
were
you're up
saying
against
on
such
Twitter.
odds, you know.
People were saying on Twitter they'd like to have her as the Prime Minister.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was responding, you can't have her, she's ours.
Oh yeah.
My wife, my daughter manages a restaurant in the Grass Market, and we were down there on the Welsh Saturday after the game, and it was obviously crowded with Welsh supporters. And I kid you not, almost to a person, we got a bit of banter with them, great fun. They were all wanting Nicola as their leader in Wales, you know, it was quite incredible. Not so much for, what's her name, the Plaid Cymru leader.
Yeah, good.
They weren't as positive for her, which is, I was quite shocked that to a person who wanted Nicola as their leader. It was really funny.
Well, I spoke to the night before. I spoke to a Welsh person, and I said to him, "What are you voting?" And he said, "Not Plaid Cymru, because they're too focused on the Welsh language, and they're he wasn't at all positive about them.
Yeah.
I said, what about if you lived in Scotland, who would you vote for? He said SNP.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
That was the other thing that shocked me. A lot of them speak the Welsh language when they're up here. I mean, they were conversing with each other and then
I just when they're talking about you.
That's
not real.
Everything. I was probably surprised in a way, but it's quite shocked.
Quite strong in North Wales.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Our Gaelic is Welsh Gaelic. That's fine,
Yeah, is it?
right? Our Gaelic is Welsh Gaelic.
Yeah.
Okay,
Alright.
folks, we're doing that thing on the end of it again when we come to conversational stuff.
Okay.
So if we call it a day at that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.